We've heard from the institution and the journal, and I work at the VA, which is a federal institution, so we give out federal funds and also oversee research misconduct proceedings. So the way VA handles allegations of research misconduct is similar to the way ORI does, which I think most people are more familiar with. We have our own directive, but our directive is based on the federal policy that was outlined by OSTP and all federal agencies must follow. VA is also similar to ORI in that the facility actually performs the inquiry and the investigation that you heard about, and our office provides oversight. So we provide oversight during the process, and then once they've completed it, we will execute our end to complete how to handle any findings and corrective actions. I also want to echo something that Susan said, where the RIOs and the institutions, there's always been this question of, is there a conflict for the institution to be actually performing the investigation? And Susan spoke to the RIOs. I will also say that all the investigation committee members, I am always impressed. Being on an investigation committee must be a thankless task. It's very time consuming, it's very difficult, and it's an unpleasant thing to be involved with. But I have always been really pleasantly surprised with how seriously the committee members take it and how they also, they're incensed when they see what's going on. So it's not like something comes in and they say, we want to brush this aside. More often than not, they are also pushing to have action done because they are, upset by what they see and that they put all this work into it and they don't want to see just everything fall apart. Sometimes there are cases that we handle just at the VA. A lot of VA members have joint appointments with affiliates, and so then we will work with the affiliates. It'll be a joint investigation. So those committees are composed of members of both the VA and the affiliate. One institution leads, and we follow those policies. And a joint investigation report is issued, which is adjudicated independently on each side. So I'm just going to go. Susan covered this a little bit too, but something else from the federal regulations that all agencies and universities have to follow is the rules for confidentiality. So confidentiality is made on a need-to-know basis, but traditionally we have been much more on the conservative side of letting out information while an investigation is in process. Susan mentioned the fact that you really don't want somebody to be tainted by an allegation that winds up not to be true, but it can also jeopardize the findings of research misconduct in future actions if it turns out that confidentiality was breached earlier on. The other thing that's in the federal regulations is you want to have safeguards for the subjects who are accused of research misconduct, and during a research misconduct proceeding, they are allowed to go on and conduct their business. They're supposed to be able to run a lab. They're supposed to be able to act as if nothing is going on until you have some resolution. So this is not a judicial proceeding, but something else that many universities and the VE also tends to take seriously is that there's kind of a presumption of innocent until proven guilty. And so really no action is taken until the entire process is complete. I'm just going to, one more difference between universities and ORI and the VA. Universities are extramural. So what happens with the university is they will go through a research misconduct proceeding. The university will make a finding. The university can then take action on its own, and then it forwards the case to ORI or NSF to see if any additional federal action can be taken. VA is an intramural funding agency. So a research misconduct proceeding is completed. No action can be taken until it's run its course. So it has to go through the facility where the research misconduct allegedly occurred. It then goes to a network director, and then like ORI, there's a finding for appeal. So the VA takes a little bit longer in the sense that we don't have that middle step where you can take any action. However, the VA's appeal process is a little more, is a little bit shorter. So I'm sure most people are familiar with this. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but research misconduct is very narrowly defined. So we get a lot of things that come into our office, but they're not research misconduct. So it's fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism, or FFP, as I think everyone is really familiar with. And research misconduct does not include honest error or difference of opinion. And this is something that really is something that gets a lot of, committees have to spend a lot of time ruling out honest error. The criteria for making a finding is that there must be a significant departure from the accepted practices. The misconduct must be committed intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly, and the allegation must also be proved by a preponderance of the evidence. So all of this goes into saying making a final determinant of research misconduct is, it's really not as straightforward as it would seem. So you can look at things and you can look at images and you can look at plagiarism and you can say, well, this is clearly research misconduct. You can look at it and say there's something wrong here, but going from saying there's something wrong to the fact that it's actually research misconduct is an incredibly long process. You know, there's, you know, you'll get something that comes in and there are all these tools to look at things. You have to be able to interpret the tools that you have, and that's not always a straightforward thing to do. Again, as I said before, ruling out honest error is an incredibly difficult, you know, I mean, pretty much most respondents will say, oops, this was a mistake. And, you know, there are things, you know, can you make a mistake 20 times? You know, there's a lot of things that come into play, but really ruling out honest error is something that just takes a lot of time. Another issue is determining who is responsible. So this is another thing that adds time because you really have to analyze evidence and figure out who committed the misconduct. Again, you can look at something and say, yes, this looks like misconduct or this looks like something is wrong, but figuring out who is responsible is not always easy. And I will say another thing that's coming up in a lot of our cases is, you know, it used to be that assigning responsibility was the person who actually had their hands on the figure and altered and did that. However, people are trying to step back and say, can we assign this responsibility to the head of the lab or the corresponding author? And, you know, even though they didn't actually commit the misconduct, what is their responsibility in that case? So that's it's very topical right now. We have a lot of cases where that's a big issue, where you have a lab where you have one PI and a lot of stuff going on, and he didn't actually do anything, but it's very, very hard to say that that person actually committed research misconduct. And investigations get very large with a lot of allegations. ORI is actually, I mean, you have to do some investigations start off large and some get large because when something comes in and you look more, the more you look, the more you find. So, you know, and something that might not seem like a big case will wind up being a big case. So when you add all these things together, making that final determinant of research misconduct really can take a long time. And so, you know, this is kind of what Susan was talking a little bit before about data integrity versus a finding of research misconduct. Filing an allegation of research misconduct is not going to result in a speedy retraction. So due to the factors I spoke about before, research misconduct investigations can take years. And it's not because the committees are dragging their feet. It's not because people don't care. They're very labor intensive and they take a long time. And also, there may be more. You may know of one allegation, but the case may be at the institution, and they're looking at 20 allegations. And this whole idea of having to wait until the whole case is over is really what slows things down. The outcome of an investigation may not be able to sustain a finding of research misconduct. So once you've had a research misconduct case that doesn't result in a finding, it's very difficult to disclose information about that case. And then once a finding is made, the journal is notified. And we just heard, it's not just like you pass something off to a journal and they could say, hey, we're going to do this. You know, we realize that we give something to a journal with the recommendation, and they have to go through their processes as well to kind of determine what they're going to do and how they're going to phrase the retraction and what they're going to say. So I'm just going to finish up talking about a unique case that we had at the VA. So the investigation committee, you know, they actually looked at the figures and the data, and they determined that intentional falsification occurred because of the nature of the manipulation. You know, it wasn't just simply reusing and relabeling, it was a lot of stretching and flipping and all this other stuff. So they determined that there was intentional research misconduct. However, the committee could not determine who was responsible for the misconduct. The witnesses were no longer available to be interviewed, and no records could be found. So they really just couldn't say who was actually responsible. So in this case, they made, I mean, I should put finding in quotation because making a finding without a responsible individual is not, it's not typically done. So they did make a finding of research misconduct. So once they had that finding, there were very limited actions that you could take because you have to take action against an individual, but with no individual named, it was difficult to take those actions. However, they did send detailed letters to the journal editors. And the journal editors actually, it was arranged. I mean, it's interesting. There were a bunch of different journal articles, and some journals acted faster than others. Some journals printed more and gave more information. So, you know, on the one hand, this was kind of a satisfying result in that without actually having a finding of misconduct against an individual, the journals were contacted and the journals could take action. But there was also in the background, no individual was named. So while no individual was named, sort of everybody on the paper may have been implicated. So, it's kind of a plus minus in being able to do that. The other thing that we're seeing more of is, this idea of data integrity and culpability. So when in this case, when the author was contacted about, when he was contacted about the retraction, the corresponding author said, "I'm sorry, these were errors, and I want to just submit this correction based on repeated experiments." And so, that's fine for addressing the data integrity issues, but it kind of, it doesn't address that research misconduct occurred initially. And something else we're seeing a lot of now is during a research misconduct proceeding, before we contact the journals, the respondents are contacting the journals, and basically they're saying, they're not saying I'm being investigated for research misconduct. They say, "Oops, I found this mistake. I would like to correct it," without mentioning the research misconduct. So again, from the journal's point of view, that might be fine in terms of data integrity, but then they come back and it kind of affects, the research misconduct proceeding, and how important is it to actually make a correction or retraction based on the research misconduct. So that's all I have. Thank you.